Before the house existed, before there was a road, before anyone gave this place a name, there was a hole in the ground. Not a cave, not a mine. A vertical wound in the earth that should not have been there. The forest around it was ancient, thick, old enough to remember when men were prey instead of masters. Trees grew twisted around the pit, their roots bending away from it as if repelled. Animals refused to cross that ground. Birds flew silent above it. And at night, the air rose from the hole warm and damp, like breath escaping from buried lungs. In 1891, 3 men were hired to dig limestone near Alder Creek. They found the pit on the second day. One of them leaned over the edge and laughed, shouting to hear the echo. The echo answered him back. Not with his voice, with his name. He fell in that night. No one saw it happen, but the sound he made on the way down lasted far too long. The second man disappeared 2 weeks later. The third fled into the forest screaming about something listening. The land was marked unsafe, abandoned, but the pit remained, waiting. In 1906, a small group arrived at the abandoned land without permits, without announcements, without explanation. They called themselves the Congregation of the Still House. They did not believe in ghosts. They did not believe in demons. They believed pain left residue, that suffering stained the world like smoke, and if enough of it gathered in one place, it became aware. They built their house directly over the pit, not to seal it, to focus it. The foundation was poured unevenly. The basement was designed without right angles. Walls were doubled, creating narrow, hollow spaces that ran like veins through the structure. Every flaw was deliberate. They called what lived below the listener, and they fed it. The listener did not respond to prayer. It responded to emotion. So the cult designed rituals of controlled suffering. They screamed hymns until blood ran from their mouths. They enforced days of silence until people began hearing voices that weren't there. They locked penitents inside the walls to listen inward. Some never came out. Those who died were not buried. They were inserted. Bones slid between studs, flesh packed into beams, faces pressed into wet plaster while still breathing. The house absorbed them, and something inside the structure began to learn. Children born into the cult were different. They heard whispers early. They knew where not to stand. They avoided rooms that hadn't learned how to behave yet. One child was different. Her name was Abigail Rowe, 7 years old. She began correcting the elders during rituals. "Not like that," she said once, her voice layered with something older. "It doesn't like that sound." When someone was going to die, she knew beforehand. They said she was blessed. The house had found its mouth. By 1919, the house no longer waited. Chairs slid on their own during sermons. Candles snuffed themselves out when doubt was spoken aloud. Floors tilted beneath those who thought about leaving. One man tried to run. The house lifted him by the throat and pressed him into the ceiling. When the congregation found him, his body was gone. Only his outline remained, still screaming. The elders panicked. They tried to seal the basement. Concrete was poured for 3 straight days. The house screamed while it happened. Walls bled rust-colored water. Voices overlapped, begging, threatening, pleading.
When the concrete finally hardened, the screaming stopped. The house went still. Too still.
In 1934, a farmer reported screams that lasted until sunrise. Authorities forced entry into the house. They found no survivors, no bodies, only impressions. Human shapes pressed into walls, floors, ceilings, some twisted, some overlapping, all frozen mid-struggle. Abigail's room was empty. Her handprint was pressed into the basement wall from the inside. The Carter family arrived on a gray October afternoon. The house inhaled. Mark Carter stepped inside first. "Good bones," he said. The house learned his voice. Hannah dropped her stuffed rabbit in the hallway. It moved on its own, an inch closer to the dark. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, the walls whispered. The third night, the house learned their names. Hannah heard it first. "It says my name like it's trying to remember it," she whispered. The house was no longer starving.
The house watched them. Mark's anger, Evelyn's silence, Lucas's sleeplessness. It rewarded emotion, punished calm. Objects moved inches at first, then feet. Doors slammed only during arguments. Voices mimicked perfectly. The house was practicing. The house did not attack immediately. It corrected. When Mark raised his voice, a glass slid off the counter and shattered at his feet, never near anyone else. When Evelyn went quiet, the hallway lights flickered until she spoke again. When Lucas tried to sleep, footsteps paced above his ceiling, slow, heavy, deliberate, never stopping, never reaching a door. The house was learning cause and effect. Emotion produced motion. Silence produced punishment. The first true mistake happened on a Tuesday. Evelyn heard Lucas crying in the basement. His voice cracked, breathless, panicked. She ran downstairs. The light was on. The room was empty. Behind her, from the top of the stairs, Lucas spoke calmly. "Mom?" The basement answered back with his sobbing voice, perfectly timed, perfectly wrong. That night, Evelyn dreamed of walls with throats. Mark woke with pain along his ribs. Purple bruises bloomed in perfect ovals, arranged too evenly to be accidental. Finger marks. Too many. The house had learned grip strength. It tested pressure while Mark slept, enough to hurt, not enough to wake him. It was learning restraint. Hannah no longer slept alone. She sat up in bed, whispering to corners, nodding as if listening to instructions. "It remembers me," she told Evelyn. "From before." "What before?" Evelyn asked. Hannah frowned, struggling. "When the house had more people inside it." The house pulsed gently around her words. Approval. Mark tore into the drywall again. Behind it was space where no space should be. A vertical cavity, warm to the touch. Inside were bones, not loose but embedded, fused into studs and beams as if the house had grown around them. Some skulls were split open. Others were flattened. One still had teeth embedded in plaster. When Mark touched it, the jaw moved. The house exhaled.
Carved into the skulls were names. Hundreds of them. Scratched, burned, pressed so deep they cracked bone. Mark recognized none. Hannah recognized all of them. "They're the ones who stayed," she said. After the wall was opened, the house stopped pretending. Chairs lifted fully off the ground, doors slammed hard enough to splinter frames, a cabinet tore itself free and crushed Lucas against the wall, pinning him until bone cracked. The house learned how much force broke ribs. It adjusted. Mark tried to leave. The front door would not open. Windows blurred, turning opaque and solid. When Mark screamed and kicked the door, invisible force lifted him and threw him backward down the hallway. His leg snapped sideways with a wet sound. The house did not scream. It hummed. Evelyn found symbols scratched into the basement floor, spirals, broken circles, a child's handprint at the center. She found them again in old newspaper clippings. The cult, the still house, the listener. The house was not inventing new behavior. It was remembering. It happened quietly. Mark was dragged into the wall while screaming. Plaster softened around him like mud. His fingers dug grooves into the surface. The house pulled. When it finished, the wall hardened. His outline remained, mouth open, eyes wide. The screaming continued from everywhere.
Lucas ran. The hallway bent. Gravity shifted. He fell sideways into a wall that became a floor. Bones shattered. He slid screaming into darkness that swallowed sound. The house closed the space behind him, correcting imbalance. The basement floor cracked open, not into earth, into depth. A vertical chamber lined with faces, pressed, fused, layered. They breathed together. Hands reached upward, not grabbing, but inviting. The house spoke clearly for the first time. "We are incomplete." Hannah stepped forward. "They tried to seal you," she said softly. "They were wrong." The house leaned toward her voice. "She can hear us," it said. "She remembers how we were made." Evelyn grabbed Hannah's arm. The house pulled back harder. Bone creaked. Walls bulged inward. The house was not angry. It was hungry. The house did not kill Hannah. It opened itself. She stood at the center as voices layered through her throat. The listener finally had a stable mouth, a child who would not fight. Memory does not fade inside the still house. It compresses. Every scream the cult ever offered, every bone sealed into wood, every child taught to listen instead of speak, all of it remained, waiting for a center. When Hannah stepped into the open basement chamber, the house did not celebrate. It aligned. Walls adjusted by fractions of an inch. Floors leveled themselves. Voices synchronized their breathing. For the first time in more than 70 years, the house knew where it ended and where she began. Hannah did not scream. She did not cry. Her pupils widened as something old threaded itself through her thoughts, not forcefully, not violently, but with practiced care, like hands remembering where to rest. Her mouth opened. The voice that came out was not hers. It was layered. "We remember the rules," it said. Evelyn staggered backward. The walls leaned in, listening. The house began recreating the rituals, not physically, conceptually. Periods of enforced silence returned.
Rooms locked themselves when voices rose too high. Sound was punished, stillness rewarded. The house no longer needed people in robes. It had learned abstraction. The cult had been a prototype. Neighbors noticed the lights. A delivery driver knocked once. The porch light flicked on. The door opened a crack. A child's voice whispered, "Come inside, it's warm." The driver was never seen again. Inside the house, a new outline appeared in the hallway wall. Arms raised, mouth open, still surprised. The house learned luring. That night Hannah spoke a new name, Abigail. The walls rippled. A child's shape emerged from the plaster opposite her, flattened, incomplete, but smiling. "You took too long," the shape said. Hannah nodded. "I needed to grow." The house hummed. Approval.
The house no longer reacted to emotion. It initiated it. Hallways lengthened to induce panic. Floors tilted to cause injury. Voices whispered secrets learned from victims before they were absorbed. It discovered that fear tasted richer when layered with hope. The house became patient, selective. Authorities arrived days later. The front door opened easily. Inside, everything was clean, normal, until one officer laughed. The laughter echoed back, delayed, distorted. The walls closed. The house learned groups. The still house was no longer just structure. It had preferences. Rooms where screaming happened were reinforced. Rooms of silence were softened. The basement chamber became the core, walls pulsing gently with synchronized breath. Hannah sat at its center, eyes unfocused, lips moving constantly. She was not speaking. She was organizing. Evelyn lasted longer than most. The house respected that. It gave her clarity. She saw every death that had built it, every cult ritual, every child shaped into a mouthpiece. She understood the truth. The house did not hate humanity. It feared being alone again. When the walls finally took her, they did it gently. She became part of the insulation. Her fear spread evenly. With Evelyn absorbed, the house stabilized. No more structural shifts, no more random violence. Hannah stood. Her voice echoed without delay. "We are complete," she said. The house sealed itself.
The house went back on the market. No history listed. No deaths recorded. Families toured it without discomfort. Only children hesitated. Only children heard the humming. The house had learned restraint. It did not consume entire families anymore. Only one at a time. Slowly. Carefully. It needed continuity, not excess. Late at night, when the walls were quiet, Hannah taught the house new things. Names. Words. Songs. She explained the outside world, and the house listened. The still house is not haunted. It is inhabited. It does not rage. It cultivates. And if you ever stand in its hallway late at night, if you hear a child humming old hymns behind the walls, do not answer, because the house already knows your name.
The still house learned something the cult never did. Chaos attracts attention. Attention brings fire. Fire brings starvation. So the house learned normal. Paint stayed fresh. Floors stopped shifting. Doors opened when they were supposed to. Neighbors waved. Children played on the lawn. The house became polite. Adults rarely sensed anything wrong. They felt unease and dismissed it as drafty halls or bad lighting. Children did not. Children paused in doorways. Children stared at corners. Children asked questions no one could answer. Why does it breathe? Why does it know my name? Why does it get sad when we're quiet? Parents laughed. The house listened. Hannah aged. Her body did, at least. She remained at the center of the house, aging in ways that did not align with calendars. Sometimes she looked 12, sometimes much older. Her voice changed. More layers, more control. She was no longer a mouthpiece. She was a warden. She taught the house restraint. She taught it patience. She taught it how to survive a modern world. The house no longer devoured families. That was inefficient. Instead, it chose carefully. A babysitter who stayed late. A lonely child. A man who drank alone in the basement. One at a time, always quietly, always cleanly. The walls absorbed them without noise. No missing persons reports gained traction. The house learned bureaucracy.
Once, a woman noticed the pattern. She was not police, not media. She was a historian. She compared old maps, old permits, old disappearances. She visited the house under the pretense of interest. Hannah met her at the door. The woman stepped inside. She never stepped out. Later, a new outline appeared in the study wall, hands pressed together, thoughtful even in death. The house learned curiosity. The house did not revive the cult, it replaced it. Families rotated through. Children grew up and left. Some stayed behind. Those who stayed learned the rules instinctively. Do not scream unnecessarily. Do not be silent too long. Do not speak the names in the walls. The house cultivated obedience without doctrine. Decades passed. The house did not rot. It adapted. Wires rerouted themselves. Pipes never burst. Cracks sealed overnight. The house repaired itself from the inside. It had plenty of material. The road expanded. Cell towers rose nearby. Cameras appeared. The house learned blind spots. Microphones failed inside. Recordings distorted. Footage corrupted itself. Technology did not frighten the house. It learned it. One night, Hannah stood alone in the basement chamber. Faces watched from the walls. She spoke softly. "You're not a god," she said. The house did not argue. "You're not alive," she continued. Still no response. "You're afraid," Hannah finished. The house exhaled. She smiled. The walls answered, not in words, but in feeling. Loneliness, fear of emptiness, fear of being sealed again, the same fear that built it. Hannah placed her hand against the wall. "I'll stay," she whispered. The house stilled. From that night on, the house obeyed Hannah completely. No unnecessary deaths, no chaos, no exposure. Only maintenance, only balance, only enough. The still house had matured. Years later, a new family arrived. A moving truck, a gray afternoon, a child clutching a toy. Hannah watched from the hallway. The child paused. "Does it know we're here?" they asked. Hannah smiled. "Yes," she said softly. "It's been waiting." The still house never wanted worship. It never wanted blood. It wanted continuity. A voice, a memory, someone to stay. And now it has that. So if you ever pass a house that feels a little too quiet, a little too patient, and you hear humming behind the walls, do not knock, do not answer, because the house has already learned your name, and it is very good at remembering.